It's safe to say that large corporations have little interest in their customers outside of squeezing every last dime they can out of them. No matter how frequently they tell you they care, or that they stand with you, or that your ideals align with theirs, you must understand one thing. Their principles begin and end at moving dollars from your pocket into theirs. People are like tissues, to be used, wadded up, discarded, and never to be thought about until their wallet itches once more. Time and time again, throughout history, we have seen large corporations hijack or even initiate social movements in order to increase profits and better public perception, with the core of said movements being manipulated and skewed to suit their needs. I believe this situation is no more aptly applied than today's body positivity movement. Through disinformation, manipulation of evidence, and large donations of money, Big Sugar has shifted the narrative identifying sugar as the leading cause of obesity and cardiovascular disease, and instead made us complacent in consuming their products, which actively sicken millions of people every year. Starting in the 1940s and 50s, scientists began to see the correlation between sugar consumption and coronary heart disease. Experiments were conducted which produced evidence connecting the two, which would have greatly impacted the recommended diet for Americans and, more importantly, affected the bottom line of nearly every food industry in America which used sugar. As such, these corporations needed to pin the blame on anything else that could stem the tide of this research. They reached out to seemingly the only association that could help them at the time, the Sugar Research Foundation, or SRF. The Sugar Research Foundation, now known as the Sugar Association, was formed in 1943. It was established in the United States as a trade association representing the sugar industry. The primary aim of the SRF was to promote and advocate for the interests of Big Sugar, including conducting research to support the use and consumption of sugar. Over time, the organization expanded its activities to include public relations efforts, lobbying, and shaping the public narrative around sugar and its role in the diet. In the 1960s, the SRF commissioned 3 Harvard University scientists: Dr. Mark Hegsted, later a USDA official, Dr. Frederick J. Stare, the chairman of the university's nutrition department, and Dr. Robert McGandy, to review the studies and information linking the consumption of sugar to coronary issues, including Project 259. Project 259 was a research initiative, the primary objective of which was to address concerns about the potential health risks of excessive sugar consumption, particularly its link to heart disease. The research was conducted on rats, and preliminary data showed that increased sugar consumption led to an increase in CHD and bladder cancer. Given this implicating information, the SRF pulled all funding from research and let the project flounder. The Harvard scientists were then paid an undisclosed sum of $50,000 in today's money from the SRF to review all research presenting the link. The review, published in 1967, dramatically understated the link between sugar consumption and heart health, while simultaneously pinning the blame on saturated fats and cholesterol. If you have ever been told as a kid or an adult that fat is the predominant cause of heart issues, it was this study which propagated that idea in the first place. This review single-handedly shaped more of the American diet than almost any other study in history. For the next 60-plus years, scientists would spend much of their time studying the effects which fat had on the body, while leaving sugar largely alone. Over the next few decades, and through government subsidies, the average American's consumption of sugar would increase drastically. By the 1950s, the average American consumed approximately 60 pounds of sugar per year. By the early 2000s, that figure had more than doubled, with the average American consuming around 130 pounds of sugar annually. It is no coincidence either that the obesity rate among adults in the 1960s was around 13%, while the modern day obesity rate has ballooned to close to 42% by 2018. The SRF wasn't the only institution to blame either. Large beverage companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi have committed millions of dollars to studies showing no link between sugar and health issues. In fact, studies which have been funded by these giants are around 5 times less likely to show any correlation between sugar and its ill health effects. Coca-Cola even went so far as to start their own SRF equivalent in 2004, the Beverage Institute for Health and Wellness. This institution was formed as an in-house research institute to produce studies which would contradict and confuse the legitimate scientific research being produced, which pinned a swath of poor health effects on sugar. While this institute has been shut down since 2016, it has not been the end of Coca-Cola and Big Sugar sticking their fingers into reputable institutions in order to get their way. More recently, Coca-Cola has given $1 million to the University of Colorado Foundation to help fund another research institute called the Global Energy Balance Network. This institute's stated goal was, quote, a forum for scientists around the globe to come together and generate the knowledge and evidence-based pathways needed to end obesity, end quote. In reality, this company served as another disinformation campaign, attempting to downplay the role which nutritionally poor food and large portion sizes play in obesity, while claiming that a lack of exercise was to blame for most cardiovascular problems and being overweight. Now, how does all this link back to the body positivity movement? It's no secret at this point that consuming large quantities of sugar results in adverse health effects like obesity, heart disease, inflammation, and tooth decay. And to be frank, one does not get so large that they must be, quote, body positive without excessive and unregulated consumption of sugary and often fatty foods. We have seen these big businesses are willing to quite literally bend the scientific foundations which the diets of millions of people rely on in order to suit their needs. It would therefore be naive to believe that, at a minimum, these companies do not see a benefit in proliferating bean fat for their own gains. If you normalize being obese, then you normalize the consumption of sugary and processed foods, which only serves to help fund these companies to produce more poisonous products, and convince you that being fat is an acceptable way to live. As we have seen, the extent to which diet data is produced and manipulated by large corporations is almost absurd. It can be very difficult to separate fact from fiction, whether it be related to sugar, fat, meat, or carbohydrates. That is why it is important to think about our diets from a logical, reasonable, and historical perspective. Whole foods must take precedence if they can be afforded, and foods without added sugar and other chemicals should be prioritized. This issue is simply too important to be politicized along partisan lines. If you're a liberal, this issue should concern you as it impacts the quality of life of millions of people. Telling someone to embrace their obesity only supports big businesses and executive profits, and simultaneously makes individual lives more miserable. It also puts excess and undue strain on our healthcare system, which is what liberals should strive to provide for everyone. If you are a conservative, this issue should concern you because having the ability to choose which foods you wish to eat and which companies you wish to support is a tenet to our freedom as Americans. Obesity related to sugar consumption also disproportionately affects poor and middle-class blue-collar workers, who make up the backbone of American labor. If these workers suffer from health issues, it is the taxpayer who has to foot the bill, and that is money coming out of your paycheck. As much as the powers that be want you to believe that the only way to win in this country is by destroying the other side with logic and facts, there is plenty of room for issues which we can unite behind in order to form a freer and healthier society. The bottom line is that whether you believe the body positivity movement is a force for good or evil, it is undeniable that someone, or rather a few people, will benefit greatly from the weight gain and obesity of the general public, and from the pain and suffering of millions of people.